Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for joining me again. Today I want to talk more about symbolic thinking and particularly focusing on the pattern of the cult that we brought up in the last video. I think this pattern is pretty critical for understanding kind of a broad symbolic framework for seeing the world. And I kind of want to make a note about symbolic thinking that these concepts, they're not necessarily specialized, or they're not like the province of some expert or something. They're really just kind of lenses on viewing the world. So symbolic thinking is really a paradigm of how we think and process and understand patterns in life as well as in the natural world. So the terms themselves, they're important because they signify the concept that we're talking about. But there's a little bit of flexibility in how we talk about symbolic thinking and some of the names that we give to these patterns. Because the important thing is the concept, and then using these concepts as a way to kind of build a symbolic way of thinking, which in my opinion is a more balanced and fleshed out way of thinking that is directly relevant to life compared to, say, just a purely materialistic way of thinking or a quote unquote scientific way of thinking, which is actually much more than science. It's often blended with some pretty deep philosophical presuppositions that can't be accounted for within the scientific framework itself. So ultimately, everything comes down to philosophical perspective and metaphysical presuppositions and things like that. So symbolic thinking is just maybe a more balanced way to account for all these different processes and patterns that we encounter in the world. And obviously, the world includes our lives and our personal perspectives and things like that. So we talked about different symbolic patterns already. And usually when I talk about symbolic thinking, I'm focusing on certain patterns themselves, like especially fractal patterns that emerge at different scales and oftentimes will embed within the same pattern. So we talked about identities as a structure, a symbolic structure with three parts, namely the horizontal process, the vertical process, and the expansion process. So I talked about those in a couple videos back. And we'll kind of throw that in again just for review and reminder. But the next one that we kind of built up from there was the cult pattern. And I want to spend a little more time on the cult pattern because it does incorporate these other three processes, these three fractal patterns, but it kind of ties them together in a way to help understand kind of how life is composed. So just a real quick review, the cult pattern is composed of the focal point, which I use interchangeably with axis of attention, because basically an axis is kind of an elongated focal point, right? You have to think of these things in terms of how they exist in time as they stretch out. So we have a focal point of attention, or an axis of attention, around which activities and resources coalesce or get oriented. And so that basic pattern we can see in everything we do. Me making this video, there's a focal point of attention, which you could say is the camera, but actually it's the topic that I'm talking about. And then all of my words and focus is going around to flesh out this topic. But at the same time, there's a material aspect to this too, where I'm sitting in a chair, I have recording devices, I have kind of an environment that facilitates that, right? When this video is done, all those pieces that came together will disperse. And then they'll kind of go back to their original places, so to speak, and then be involved in other purposes and other cults, let's say. So that's one example. Another example, just to kind of clarify the idea, is let's say I cook a meal. There's a focal point of attention, an axis of attention, the meal, and then all of my activities and resources to make that happen come together and form this pattern, which is the same structure as making the video. And you can fill in the blank with anything we do, right? It's the same pattern. So one additional layer to that we didn't really talk about a lot is in each of these activities, for lack of a better word, and I want to reemphasize, like, there's overlap in the terms we use. So let's just make sure we're clear on the concepts. So it gives us flexibility in how we like say these things. You know, you can talk about the focal point or the axis of attention. You might have another word. Just get the pattern, right? The thing that binds the activities together and the resources together to let's say manifest or realize the axis of attention, the goal that we have, to realize the meal, to realize the video, etc. That's composed of a set of rules, let's say, to make sense and to bring all those things together in a proper way, right? You can bring the resources for making a meal together, but then not do anything with them, or do something maybe very inefficiently with them, or mess things up, right? There's all kinds of things that could emerge as kind of elements of chaos. And so to put all those elements and the activities in their proper order to make the result come to be, in this case the meal, there's a certain set of rules that you have to follow, right? There's a certain set of rules I have to follow to make a decent video. There's all kinds of things that you can imagine where I could screw that up, or I could fail at it and just it never happens, or you start part way. But to make this thing happen in the first place, to come together around this focal point of attention, and then to bring it to fruition, you need a set of rules or principles to bring order to that, let's say, event, to bring order to the cult pattern. I'm going to call that the religio. That's one term I want to use. It's the set of binding and orienting principles that bring the activities and resources together in a coherent way that makes the focal point of attention manifest, that makes it happen. Okay, I'm using religio in a slightly different way than, let's say, the Latin root. And so in that sense, we can maybe use a different word, but just for now, the set of rules, the religio, that binds the activities and resources together in a coherent way, which, let's say, you could say maximally or optimally brings the focus of attention to fruition. Okay, so that's the layer I wanted to add, the religio, this kind of set of rules, or this system of doing things. And obviously, from house to house, from person to person, culture to culture, the religio is going to be different. But the point is that the religio is there, right? There is a way to bring about a meal, and there's a way to screw it up, or there's a way to fail at it. There's a way to cut it off so that it doesn't actually happen, right? So the religio is an important layer to the cult pattern itself. The other really crucial element to this is the purpose. So you go into the kitchen, I come here into this room for a video. In whatever let's say cult activity you're involved in, the focal point of attention provides the purpose, which then helps to orient the activities and the resources in the right direction. So the focal point, or the axis of attention, provides the purpose, which then enables the cult to manifest, right? The cult pattern to manifest. Without the theme of the axis of attention, making a meal, going to the bathroom, going to bed, traveling, whatever it is, without that theme, there can't be a purpose. But the theme and the purpose are slightly different, right? The theme provides let's say the answer to the question of what is the purpose, or what is the purpose for, right? But the purpose itself is something slightly different, which we could say is it's the orienting principle or the guiding principle, which enables a theme or an axis of attention to emerge, right? They go hand in hand. So if I want to build a house, first I have to have the idea of building a house before I can even focus on the house, right? So there has to be an intention, a reason, which is kind of an empty category, and then I fill that with a theme, build the house, and then that becomes my focal point of attention. And then from there, I have I have an axis around which now I can attempt at least to properly bring all of the resources and activities together to make that happen over a span of time. So you can kind of see how all these elements fit together. I have a religio, which is the ordered system or the binding ligamented set of rules that bring all these things together properly. I have also the things that come together, the resources and the activities. And all of that is forming around this axis of attention, right? The theme of which is building the house. And that theme is almost held together by the purpose, right? The purpose as this kind of, let's say, empty category, which then gets filled by the theme of the axis of attention. So it's a little bit maybe unclear how these are actually like separate from each other, the purpose and the axis of attention. But I think that's a good introduction for purpose, and we'll flesh it out because I don't want to make this video too long. We'll flesh it out in future videos. But I think as a symbolic pattern, purpose is kind of its own thing. So if you remember back to the vertical process, where we have the parts of an identity, the whole identity itself, and the meaning, which is the bond or the relation of the parts to the whole, and then also of the whole to the whole outside of itself, of which it is part. I think that grammar all makes sense, right? We had this concept of meaning as kind of the binding relation between the parts which come together to form the whole. And then, of course, a whole is always a part of something bigger than itself, right? But we kind of left out purpose as a separate thing. So meaning and purpose are slightly different. Purpose gives, like I said, the guiding and orienting principle as sort of an empty category that is filled by a theme, which is the axis of attention. And that's how these parts come together by a certain design or set of principles or religio to form the thing which the theme, let's say, dictates or prescribes or requires to manifest based on what it is, based on, okay, it's a tree, it's a house, it's a meal, it's whatever. It's a rock, right? We can do this with inanimate things too. So in this kind of set of concepts, we're kind of piecing it all together, right? So this is kind of introductory. Hopefully it's not too complicated. What we've kind of just described is telos, right? Telos is let's say the inner design which manifests along a pathway, resulting in the fruition or the manifestation of the, let's say, encoded theme itself. So it sounds a little different from what we're talking about with meaning and purpose and things like that in the cult pattern. But do I want to dig into this right now and make this video really long, or should we hold off and treat it differently? Let's just kind of cap it off. We'll do a little kind of unpacking, and then we'll do a separate video on the telos. But telos involves all these elements. So the most basic example is like a seed for a tree or a plant. The telos is that inner design, that inner code within what we understand in the modern day to be the genetic framework or the genetic code, which gives purpose and direction to how material processes come together to form the tree through the growth cycle or the developmental cycle of the organism, right? Of the tree in this case, or of a person. Gosh, I'm a little bit unsatisfied with how I put those ideas together, though. So I think we need a little more time to work out telos in terms of how it functions in relationship to purpose and meaning, because it's also like there are so many layers to this that I don't want to get confused either when we're trying to unpack this and make it simple. So let's just say for now we have the empty category of the organizing, orienting principle, which precedes everything. That empty category of the orienting, organizing principle is filled with a theme. That theme is the focal point of attention. So now that theme, with its kind of inherent ordered system of the religio, and I think this is where we could see where the seed is. The seed has the ordered internal system of the religio, which will guide how these elements come together to form the result of the implied result of the seed itself, right? And then around this axis of attention, following the rules of the inner code, materials and activities coalesce, and they give us a pattern called the cult. And that might manifest in an actual living thing, right? Again, this is all symbolic, so we can see this at different levels of reality. That living thing might be a tree, it might be a human being, it might even be a rock, which is not living, but it has an internal coherence which allows certain molecules to come together to form, right, a certain mineral or whatever. Or this can all manifest in the cult pattern as a more abstract, like human activity or an animal activity for that matter, which doesn't have necessarily a body, but it certainly has a result and it certainly has a shape in time and space, right? So let that be enough for now. We'll come back to it. We'll keep working on it. We'll keep kind of coming up with examples and things to understand how this all plays out in real life, because that's where it's really relevant. This whole paradigm of symbolic thinking is really relevant to real life, right? We don't want to just like speak in terms of fantasy and stuff. So there you have it. We've touched on purpose, meaning, the theme of purpose. We've touched on the axis of attention, which the theme provides, and we've touched on telos, which is kind of the seed itself, in which the religio of the theme is encoded, which then tells all of the parts and processes how to come together to manifest the identity, basically. The identity being the tree, or the identity being the meal, right? The cult of the meal. We could say then, in that sense, that the tree is a cult. It's a cult pattern. It's a manifested cult pattern. We'll leave it there. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, or subscribe to support my work.